This is a viewer-requested prop. Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name's Ryan, or RGR Productions, and today I'll be showing you how I made ARC Trooper Havoc's helmet. The first thing I did for this project was start on the dome, and this dome is the exact same thing as the past 3 of my projects, so it's just a strip that's about 26 inches just to give me some room for my head, then a crossbar across the top, and then 2 smaller pieces from side to side, and that fills in the rough shape easily. Then I took the same pattern for my Phase 2 Clone Trooper helmet, and I glued that on the very front. It's the same shape. After I had that glued on, I glued a little support piece in between the 2 cheek parts of the helmet, and then after I had that done, I started working on the grill. So that is just a piece that I glued in behind that. And then once I was happy with that, I worked on the angular chin piece. So that is just 2 pieces of cardboard, and I cut them to where they would angle together nicely. And then I just glued them on and made sure that it would have a nice seam in the middle that is easy to cover up with some spackle. The chin piece just started out as 2 rectangles, and I glued one on one side, and then I angled the edge so it would have a slight angle, maybe about 45 or above, and then I would just trim it a little bit, and I angled the bottom edge to where it would look nice, and then also the outside edges. I also angled those inward to make the front tubes angle inward as well, because those will be glued on top of them. Then I started working on the side of the helmet, so I just took some rectangles of cardboard and I glued them on the sides about to the same length as where the bottom of the frown is. And then after I had that glued on, I started filling in the edges, so I just stuck a piece of cardboard on, and I kind of made those same similar compartment parts as my Phase 1 and my Phase 2. And I just made sure to wrap them around and also to make sure that there's no gaps, because if there are gaps, then that isn't too good and it won't look as good. The pieces of cardboard on the front and back sides of those compartments are just straight rectangles of cardboard, but then for the top of it, it has to be a curved piece of cardboard, so I just held up a piece of cardboard and traced out the rough shape, and then I just covered that up with some cardboard, so on the inside you wouldn't be able to see your face when you're wearing it. After I had that done, I started working on the tubes on the sides. So I just took a piece of cardboard, glued it to the bottom of the compartment, and then I bent it around and glued it to the inside so it would look nice and there wouldn't be any gaps on the inside. Then I did the same thing on the other side, and I also started working on the front tubes. So these angle down more than the sides, and they also link up the chin to that. So that looks very nice, and I'm really happy with how it's looking so far. So now I glued on the parts on the other side, so the tube underneath the side compartment where the cheek is, then the front chin tube where those 2 little greeblies will go. Then I took a piece of cardboard and drew out this similar house shape to my Phase 2 helmet, and I glued it in that gap and made sure that there were no gaps around the edges. And then I also filled in those front compartments with more pieces of cardboard. After I had that done, I rounded off the side pieces that cover your ears, and that just was a mistake on my part, so I just made sure to fix that, and they should be going a little bit higher. These pieces should be going up on covering part of the dome, but I didn't realize this until it was too late to fix it. So if you're gonna make this, just make sure to make that change so yours is more accurate than mine. Then I continued to fill out that tube that goes all the way around the back, and this was a little bit too small for my head to fit in, so later on I ended up trimming off just a little bit of space so I could fit my head in, but that's fine. It was just my ears that couldn't fit. After I had that done, I started filling in the dome just a little bit. So same thing as my other projects, just a piece of cardboard halfway in between the front and the side, and then pieces of cardboard that just fill in that. And you just hold them up and trace them out until they fit perfectly, and then you glue them on. It's okay if they have small gaps because you'll be filling with spackle or anything else of your choice. Bondo works the best, but that's pretty expensive and I don't have access to that, so I just use spackle. You could also use paper mache to cover the dome, as I did in my phase 2 video. I just don't like that as much. I used that in the past, but I don't think it looks as good now. The spackle creates one even layer, so does Bondo, but the paper mache leaves these little small paper edges that you can see, and it just bothered me a little bit, so I stopped doing that and I used spackle. I filled in both sides of the front, and then I started working on the fin on the top. So this is the exact same type of fin as my phase 1 helmet, and I just glued on 2 pieces parallel next to each other, about 3/4 of an inch apart, and then I glued a piece of cardboard to connect the 2 pieces. I also glued a piece going from the back of the fin all the way around to that point, and then back around, so you couldn't see inside of the fin. Then I just did 2 little detail lines on top of it, and then once I had that done, I was pretty happy with it. And for that, I did some pretty thin pieces of cardboard. I actually took pieces of cardboard and I ripped off the top layer, so it was very thin, and then I just glued that on for the little details, and it ended up working pretty well. That's a good way to get some thin cardboard if you don't have access to a cereal box or something like that. I started to do that little detail on the front, but then I realized that it would actually have to be black, so I ended up just ripping it off, and I just painted a separate piece of cardboard later on to glue that on. Then I just worked on the back. So if you look at a reference image of a phase 2 or an ARC Trooper helmet, you can see that that front faceplate kind of merges through the earpiece, and then it also comes back out on the other side, and it's just this really small triangular shaped piece. And I just glued that on the back of the earpiece. Then I started working on the back of the helmet, so it's just 2 very skinny and long triangles right next to each other, and then a little piece of cardboard in between. And right now I'm just creating this little gap where this black bar can go. If you look on a reference image, you'll see it. Then I just started working on filling in the edges of that, so I took pieces of cardboard and looked at a good reference image just to make sure that I had it right. It's just 2 similar triangular pieces that I just glued on, and then I also did the same thing where I built up a wall around the whole edge of this. If you're going to make this, please make sure not to make your wall around these compartments no more than 1/2 inch. If you do, then you probably won't be able to fit your head in it, so my rule of thumb is 1/2 inch or less. 1/4 inch might be a little bit too thin, but anywhere in between that range. This is basically the exact same process as the very front, so I just repeated that onto the back. It was a pretty simple process, and it was pretty easy. I continued to work on filling in both sides, so that's just walls around those 2 pieces, and then once I had those walls filled in, which took a little while, I worked on the top, which is similar to the top of the front compartments, where I held up a piece of cardboard, traced out the curve, and then I glued that on and traced out the curve on the inside, so a piece of cardboard could curve from the outside edge to the inside edge, and there'd be no gap along the top. Then I just took a piece of cardboard and I traced it along that wall edge, and then I glued that on, filling in the back. And you can see from a side shot how it just continues, and it's supposed to look like the same piece. I just glued on both sides. One of the sides was a little bit bigger than the other side, but oh well, it still looked fine, and I was happy with it. After I had that done, I started working on the tube again, so this tube just wraps all the way around the back. It gets a little bit thinner around the back, so it's not as curvy and round, so just keep that in mind if you're going to make this. What I do when I fill in the tube at the back is I take a piece of cardboard that's a rectangle, and I just cut off the corners on half of it. So when you bend it and put it against the other piece that you've just put on, it creates a nice angle against it. I did this on both sides, and at first I wrapped the whole piece around and glued it on the inside, but as I said earlier, my head was too big so it wouldn't fit through that, so I ended up just scrapping that idea, and I would just cut it off as soon as it would make a nice curved shape, instead of gluing it all the way around to the inside. If you have a smaller head, you could probably get away with that, and that's also more accurate, but I couldn't do that, so I just went with my method. You also don't want to add too many of these pieces around the back, because if you add too many, then it's going to be harder to fill, but if you add too little, then it'll just look weird and it'll be too chunky. So you kind of have to eyeball the amount. I would usually make each piece about 1.5 to 2 inches wide, no more than 2 inches, or else it'll just look really chunky. Unless if it's on the very front where it's pretty straight. Otherwise, I wouldn't really change anything. This is the part where I tried it on and it wouldn't fit, so I trimmed out those side walls for where my ears would go. This is basically the inside of those side compartments. So yeah, I just traced that out and cut it out. Then I just filled in the back of the dome the same way as the front, where I took a piece of cardboard that's about 1.5 to 2 inches long, and it's about 4 inches long, or tall. And then I just glued that on, and then I traced out the top shape, and then cut it and trimmed it, and then filled in the 2 edges off to the sides. Now that the construction on this helmet is all finished, I'm going to go outside and spackle over all of the seams. I won't go very in-depth in spackling in this video because I have several other videos on where I do it. The first of one and the most detailed one is my Iron Man Mark 85 helmet tutorial. But if you also want to paper mache your project, then I have my phase 2 video out on that. That's another way just to fill in the gaps on your helmet. After the spackle had dried for roughly 5 hours, I would sand it down just to make sure it's all smooth. I used a 220 grit sandpaper just to get it all nice and smooth. I basically put spackle everywhere where there were seams that I didn't want there to be. So on the dome and then on the tube that wraps all the way around the back. Then I just primed the whole piece. Now that I am done priming this project, the front of it is actually gray, so the faceplate and these pieces down here for the chin, these are supposed to be gray, so I'm going to mask those off so they remain gray, and then I'm going to paint a blue strip across the top, and then some blue down here, and this whole thing's going to be blue. Then after that's done, I'm going to mask that off and then paint the rest of it gloss white. So I'll just mask that up. Now that I am done masking this helmet, I'm going to go outside and paint it with some deep blue. I just looked at a reference image and painted blue where it seemed necessary for all of the various blue details on ARC Trooper Havoc's helmet. Now that the helmet is all nice and masked off where the blue is going to stay, I'm going to paint the rest of it with some gloss white. A helpful tip for masking and painting is to make sure that your edge of masking tape is pushed all the way down so you don't get any runs or bleeds underneath your tape. I got one at the very front, but it's not that noticeable. Now that I have removed the masking tape, it gives me a good look at how the helmet is going to turn out, and I'm really happy with it. So now I'm just going to paint the teeth a slightly different shade of gray. Then I am going to put some mesh behind it so it'll give it a nice effect. So I'll do that. Now that I've got this grill all filled in, I put some mesh in there as well. And I also have all of the other details on, like these details down at the bottom, and this black strip that goes all the way around the back, and then also this black part that goes in there. So I have all of that done, so now I also put this on, and I also need to work on the rangefinder that goes here. This is one of my older helmets. It's a Captain Rex Phase 2. This is a representation of what the rangefinder will look like. It'll look a little bit different because this is a Phase 2 rangefinder. I'm going to be building a Phase 1 rangefinder for this. And also the top of this will be blue, but then the rest of it will be silver. So now I'll go work on that. Now that I am all done with the rangefinder, I'm going to paint this top piece blue, the same blue as the helmet. And then this is just going to be painted with some metallic silver. Now that I'm waiting for the rangefinder to dry outside, I'm going to weather the helmet. I have a video out on my channel on how to weather, and I've also shown it in a couple of my other videos. So I won't be going in depth in this video, so if you want to see how to weather, go check out one of those videos. So I'll do that. Now that I have the whole helmet weathered, and I've also put in the visor, it was just from a pack of strawberries. That's a really easy way to get some plastic. So now that all of that is done, all I need to do is attach the rangefinder, which is still outside drying. So I'll bring that in, weather it, and then that'll be it. With the rangefinder attached, that's it. That's how I made my ARC Trooper Havoc's helmet. This is a really fun helmet to make, and I hope that you make it too. My next project that I'll be working on is another requested prop, which is an airborne trooper helmet. This has been RGR Productions, signing off. Till next time.